In Revelation chapter 6, verse 1 and 2, Jesus Christ is beginning to open the seals of this book. I'm going to read it from the New International Version. It puts it in a little more modern English, and I think it really zeroes in on what I want to talk about. It says, I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, Come. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow. Now, get the picture now. A white horse, and here's a rider on it, and he's carrying war materials. And he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Now, there's one other place in the Bible, and it also is in the book of Revelation, where there is someone else on a white horse. It's in Revelation chapter 19 where Jesus Christ is beginning to intervene in the atmosphere of this earth to come back to establish his kingdom on earth. In Revelation 19 verse 11 it says, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. So we know that when Jesus Christ returns, and his white represents, symbolizes really his righteousness, it's symbolizing the Messiah. Jesus Christ is the Messiah coming back to this earth. Now, in Revelation 6 verse 1 though and 2, this is not Jesus Christ. So if it's a white horse, though, and he's going out to conquer, couldn't this be the false Messiah that's going to be coming on the scene? And the Antichrist system that is working undercover all over the globe right now, couldn't it possibly be the Messiah's groundwork that's being laid, such as secular humanism? And what about the New Age movement that's coming on all over the world, literature that is being talked about? And so it's literally laying the groundwork for a false Messiah that's going to come, and he's going to conquer the world. But now let's drop down into verse 3. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, Come. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. So here's a red horse. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth. Now, notice what it says the next phrase. And to make men slay each other. What has been happening since the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917? There has been a secret group of men known as revolutionaries who go in and train men to overthrow governments. Revolutionaries, guerrilla warfare we call it. And it's been happening in every nation all over the earth, including the United States of America. People coming in secret, infiltrating and causing disturbances to overthrow and destroy every nation on the face of the earth. Now Jesus said the same thing, really, in Matthew chapter 24, verse 6 and 7. One of the very signs that Jesus gave that the end of the age was coming, I'll read it out of the New International Version. It says, You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you be not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Then he goes on in verse 7, he says, Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. Now he also includes in that same phrase, there will be famines. Now, how can famines come about as a direct result of wars and rumors of wars? When guerrilla warfare is taking place, they literally dispossess whole populations. Millions of people in North Africa right now, as a direct result of Sudan and Ethiopia, are homeless. And you see TV shows on the cable networks and private companies that beam programs showing Save the Children and then Save the Starving Masses in Africa with a food program, and trying to get all the people in America to supply money to purchase food to help those starving people who are literally in refugee camps all over the world. It's in India, in Pakistan, all over Africa, and now it's beginning to happen in South America. So as a result of the revolutionary wars that are taking place all over the world, we see people are beginning to starve, and this is literally happening, which the next horse in the 4 horses of the apocalypse tells about. Famine. It's a direct result of people being dispossessed. You can't stay in one location very long in order to plant crops and see the harvest so that you can feed yourself. So you're constantly on the run and dispossessed by these revolutionary wars. But what I want to ask is, how is all this taking place? How in the world did the revolutionaries in Russia come into being? How is it that they have such strategic weapons which they did not have the capability of producing in the past? Now, one question: if the Soviet Union itself were to militarily attack the United States today, would we, as a nation right now, continue to supply them pipes for their pipeline, just like we produced the Alaskan pipeline? They're now in the process of producing a pipeline from Siberia into Western Europe to provide natural gas and oil and so on. And yet our own country's multinational corporations are right now supplying materials for that pipeline. So if we were at war with the Soviet Union, would we continue to supply them the pipeline? Also, companies right here in the United States are literally furnishing all components to build truck factories, and they've already done it in the Soviet Union. Our own Congress passes legislation giving us permission to send our excess grain supplies to Russia and now to China. Now, the question I have is, if we were at war with them, would we be doing that? And yet we are literally at war for survival with the Soviet Union. It has been that way. Every single dictator of the Soviet Union has reiterated the purpose of world conquest, total overthrow of all civilizations and all religions, and emerge it into a one-world government with one man as a dictator over the whole system. This has been reiterated by every single leader of the Soviet Union. Now, let's go just a little further. Without the Americans' technology and the data that we supply them and the tools to repair and the training on how to repair all the equipment we give them, the Soviet Union would not have the missiles aimed at us today off the east and west coast of the United States and their submarines, their nuclear submarines. Nor would they have the missiles sitting on the borders of Russia aimed at Western Europe right now. Now, on April 13th of 1982, Senator William Armstrong delivered a very hard-hitting message to the Senate, and I want to give just a little of that information. According to Senator Armstrong, he said that in the last 10 years, the United States and other Western nations have sold the Soviet Union and its satellite nations over $50 billion worth of sophisticated equipment. All of this technology which the communists could not produce for themselves and by themselves because they don't have the technical know-how. And yet we are the ones doing it. So the United States of America and Western Europe are literally building the Soviet arsenal for world takeover. And that sounds incredible. To me, it's high treason against the Constitution of the United States. The Soviet Union wouldn't have the nuclear missiles, they wouldn't have tanks, they wouldn't have armored cars, they wouldn't have spy satellites circling the globe right now, and they wouldn't have air defense radar to stop our missiles entering to their borders unless we had provided them with the technology. Now, in addition to this, the Soviets have been able to actually purchase entire factories from our country, designed in the West, built by Western engineers, and financed by the large multinational banking corporations in the United States and Europe, mainly controlled by two groups, the Rothschilds of England and Europe and the Rockefellers of Chase Manhattan Bank in New York, as well as other banks, but those are the main controllers of those banks. A huge portion of our staggering federal debt and budget actually goes by our taxes. Now, think about this for a minute. If there were no Soviet buildup, we would not have to build huge armaments to protect ourselves from the Soviet buildup. A huge slice of our national debt each year and our budget deficit goes for our taxes producing military equipment to keep us up with or ahead of the Soviet Union. Now, if you want to reduce your tax burden, just get those treasonous individuals and multinational corporations from sending equipment over to the Soviet Union. And so they would collapse, we would save our tax money, and we wouldn't have a nuclear buildup of our own right now. But the United States has actually helped at your and my expense the building of this international communist military force, pictured in Revelation chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. The red horse going out to conquer the world and to take peace from the earth. And it's doing it. Well, in 1973, Soviet dictator Brezhnev gave a little message to his Politburo, and he made the following statement, I quote, "We communists have got to string along with the capitalists for a while." Now, what did he mean, string along? Well, we made the agreement that if we would sit down at the negotiating table and we would talk about SALT I, SALT II, and so on, we would not build up our nuclear arsenal as long as we were sitting down talking peace. Well, he said that they had to string along with us for a while. Notice this. We need their credits. Their credits in order to purchase equipment to destroy ourselves. We're going to build their factories to destroy ourselves, is what it amounts to. He said we need their agriculture. And so what have we done? We've shipped our once 30 to 60 day supply of grain crops, and now it's about a 3 or 4 day supply that we have. All the rest is shipped behind the Iron Curtain. He also said we need their technology. But we're going to continue massive military programs, and by the middle of the 1980s, we'll be in a position to return to a much more aggressive foreign policy designed to gain the upper hand in our relationship with the West. Don't we see that today? And this afternoon, in the second message, I'm going to give the statistics of the United States and Russia in every military category. Planes, ships, nuclear missiles, and I'm going to prove that the Soviet Union is at least 10 to 1 in ratio, nearly in every category, ahead of the United States. So while we are sitting here supplying all the military equipment, the agriculture to keep the supplies, to keep that nation in subjugation, they continue to use that same technology to destroy us. To be exact, they've deployed more than 340 nuclear-tipped missiles, SS-20 missiles, within striking distance of Western Europe. And this is while we were talking at the SALT tables. And while the United States government is doing nothing but talking diplomatically. Now, all this was happening while the invasion of Afghanistan was going on. We talk diplomatically. We say, would you please pull out? If you don't, we won't talk to you anymore. And they say, fine, we'll build another 200 missiles while you're not talking to us. Then you'll come back and talk to us. So we slap them on the back of the hand with a wet noodle is about what it amounts to. But of course there must be, now let's think about this for a minute. If they are now going into Latin America, Central America, all the way down into South America, if they are overthrowing government after government, Nicaragua, El Salvador, they've already taken, the Marxist regime has taken over the Panama Canal. If all this is happening, and it's all being designed somewhere, where is it being designed from and who's doing it? If we're the ones right here supplying all the food to keep the communist regime afloat, if we're supplying all the technology to keep it ahead of us militarily so that it can blackmail us into moving into a one-world government, there must be somebody behind it. And if it's all coming from the United States and Western Europe, then certainly somebody in this country, I term it treason, because the Constitution of the United States says that anyone who aids or abets the enemy, that's high treason. And yet I haven't seen one lynching in Washington, D.C. in a long time due to high treason. So there must be someone who has gained control of the government of the United States if they're going to continue to supply the enemy with all the equipment to bury ourselves. Well, let's go on just a little bit. In 1974, there was a book put out by Mr. Anthony Sutton. Many of you probably have heard of it. It's entitled Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. And I'm going to give a quote from that. He says, one barrier to mature understanding of recent history, and that's our lifetime, is the notion that all capitalists, that's people in the free enterprise system, are the bitter and unswerving enemies of all Marxists and socialists. This is one thing that has held us back from understanding communism and who is backing it. Because after all, if I'm head of a large corporation and I want to continue the profit motive and make money, I'm certainly not going to try to aid and abet the enemy who's vowed to destroy all the free enterprise system we have, would I? Well, when we come to understand it's those who are behind the profit motive on a large scale that are supplying so they can take over the world for themselves, then it begins to make sense. He goes on to say, this erroneous idea originated with Karl Marx and was undoubtedly useful to his purpose. And it was, because it turned our minds to Russia instead of those in our own midst who are the ones supplying the enemy and keeping Russia and the communist states afloat. He went on to say, there's been a continuing, concealed alliance between international political capitalists and international revolutionary socialists to their mutual benefit. One is gobbling up the world, but the other, the capitalists, are the ones who are supplying and control them through economics. One cannot exist without the other. And so those who pull the purse strings are the very ones who are in control of everything in reality. Well, on January 16th, 1967, the New York Times reported the following, I'll quote, "An alliance of family fortunes linking Wall Street and the Midwest is going to try to build economic bridges between the free world and communist Europe." Now, who are these people who are trying to build these links between the communist world and the free world? Well, he goes on to show the International Basic Economy Corporation, controlled by the Rockefeller brothers, and Tower International, headed by Cyrus S. Eaton Jr., a Cleveland financier, plan to cooperate to promote trade between the Iron Curtain countries, including the Soviet Union. And that is a reality. To be exact, this whole network of the Rockefeller system is called the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, this particular term is not very often heard of. To be exact, it's only appeared one time on national television. One time. And that was on the late night show on Channel 2, ABC. There was a man being interviewed about a book that he wrote. And it was showing how Mr. Henry Kissinger had pulled a few strings that were not exactly to the best interest of the United States. And it actually gave the man's title who was defending Mr. Kissinger, and it said Council on Foreign Relations. And that's the only time it's ever appeared on television. Now, it's been in print a few times, but not very often. So when you mention the term Council on Foreign Relations, most Americans have never even heard of such an organization. And yet it was founded in 1919 by Edward Mandell House, who happened to be the right-hand man and actually the ruler of the Wilson administration. They incorporated in 1921. The Rockefeller family gave them the property which they now meet in till this day on 68th Avenue in New York. But the Council on Foreign Relations is better known, I would say, by the news media. They just say such terms as the liberal Eastern establishment. That's about basically all they ever say. Other people, especially in patriotic American writers, in their literature, they usually use the term America's unelected rulers, because they realize that it's the money people behind the scene that control those who are elected to Congress. For several decades, the Council on Foreign Relations has actually run this country. And the Council on Foreign Relations make the political decisions no matter who is in office. Edward Mandell House made the statement in his book, Philip Drew Administrator. He wrote a whole outline, and he said that his goal was to capture both the Republican and the Democratic Party, so that no matter who was put up for the presidency of the United States, it would be one of their men running and going into office. And then they would put advisors behind them of the Council on Foreign Relations who had one goal. It was an end run around the Constitution to merge us into a world government. But why has the Council on Foreign Relations pushed so long for trade with the Soviet Union? Well, it's because they know that the Soviet Union of itself and a communist type of government will not work. Because when you enslave people, you take all incentive away from them. They have no reason to work. They have no reason to exist because they're total slaves. So when you have no initiative to work, why work? Why produce? You're not going to keep any of it for yourself. You only get a meager living, and that's all that you have. You're subsidized at a meager slave level, and that's it. And only those high in office have opportunity to increase their incomes, you might say, because they are in total control of the government. This is why we have to supply them agriculture from the United States, products, to keep the people fed so that the people will not rise up in revolution against that type of government. But there is a power grab that's going on in the world today. David Rockefeller is a part of it. The Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission is a part of that, and that's the tool which they're using right now through the United Nations organization also to create a world government. I want to talk about just a few of the companies, multinational corporations, who are supplying tools and equipment. Mr. Anthony Sutton has his own sources because, you see, the government of the United States is pretty smart, or at least those who have taken over. They realize that if they have taken over the government, anything they don't want the people, who is supposed to be the government, you know, we were established as a republic, and we're the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so if the government that has taken over does not want us to know what's going on, they created what's called classified information, which would be a security risk if all the people of this country knew. In other words, it wouldn't be a security risk against the United States, but against those who are plotting the overthrow of the United States. So they have now developed an elaborate system by which they conceal all information from us, the public, through classified information. But Anthony Sutton has his insiders, you might say, his own insiders inside those who are trying to destroy our country. And he comes up with the names of all those companies which have been classified because, see, they don't want us to know which companies are trading with the Soviet Union and supplying them the materials to destroy us. So a few of those he listed, and I'm going to give just a few of those. In the aircraft technology, some of them are Boeing, Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas, and that's located right not very far from us in St. Louis. Sikorsky Aircraft is another one. In the automobile industry, trucking and agriculture, here's just a few of the companies. Caterpillar Tractor, Swindle Dressler Company, Rockwell International, International Harvester, and Alice Chalmers. Those all are presently or formerly trading with the Soviet Union or their Soviet bloc countries. In the metals manufacturing, here's just a few of them. American Can, Kaiser Industries Corporation, Litton Industries, and there's a few others, but I won't mention those. In the machine tools industry, here's a few. General Electric deals with the Soviet bloc countries. The Sunstrand Corporation, Bryant Chucking Grinder Company, Bendix Corporation, American Chain and Cable Corporation, and an Allen Bradley Corporation. These are just a few of them. Now in the electronics, and this is what they have to have modern technology in order to rattle their missiles at us, to bring us into subjection, because they're going to force us into it or else have an all-out nuclear war in order to subjugate the rest of the world. Now you have to remember, as I'm reading these off, the total goal and the plan of this red horse that's going out to conquer. They said they would take the masses of Asia first, and then they would come up through Africa, the underbelly of the United States, which happens to be South and Central America, and then they would make treaties to so draw Europe into the camp. Finally, there would be nothing but the United States of America, and that we would fall like an overripe apple. Well, this is their plan. And so why would the United States be last? unless those who are supplying the equipment for the takeover of the rest of the world was located in the United States and Europe. And once the rest of the world was taken, then they would have such control over this country that it would fall into the communist orbit. In electronics, you have Honeywell Information Systems, you have Univac, Control Data, IBM, Raytheon Corporation, RCA, Hewlett-Packard. These are just a few of them. Petroleum and Chemicals, Occidental Petroleum, Tenneco, Monsanto, which is world headquarters once again in St. Louis, Alcoa and Dow Chemical. Now those are some of the large ones that are dealing with the Soviet Union. Bankers and financial houses. Here's just a few of them. Chase Manhattan Bank, Irving Trust Company, the Satra Corporation, Tower International, remember that was Cyrus Eaton and David Rockefeller. And then of course you have the one Chase Manhattan has always, since the first foreign bank went into the Soviet Union, they've had their branch office there. And also, Chase Manhattan was the first bank in China, communist China. So that tells me something. It's got to tell me something. Well, anyway, after Richard Nixon began to normalize relations with Red China in 1971, Chase Manhattan Bank was the first one that was given a red carpet. They rolled it out. David Rockefeller himself went there and set up the first branch bank to supply foreign currency to keep the communist regime in China afloat. Now, I want to give just a quote. He said, this came from the New York Times. It said, the social experiment, now this is a direct quote of David Rockefeller after he had been there to China. He said, the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. Think about that a minute. Here is a foreigner to communism, heads up one of the largest banks in the free society, the Western world, stating that Chairman Mao's leadership has brought about one of the most successful experiments in human history. Does that mean that Mr. Rockefeller wants an American experiment also, similar to that? If you will notice, in the last 2 months, we've been bombarded on television, ABC, NBC, and CBS, every one of them with programs talking about nuclear destruction. What would happen? Well, ABC had the one the day after. Nuclear destruction, in order to program your mind to be willing to submit to a world government rather than allowing a Holocaust to happen with the Soviet Union. To lay down and give up our sovereignty rather than stand up and be a free people. But you see, before we can stand up and remain a free people, we have to repent and turn back to our God first and keep His law, which is sin, the violation of it, and then turn back to Him, and He will be the one who will overthrow the communist regime. But you try to tell that to 250 million people. It's a very difficult thing to do when none of them will even turn on a religious program. When I use the phrase none will turn it on, I don't mean no one, but I mean the vast majority. You have such a minority that even care anymore that it's very difficult to get anyone to respond to radio anymore. You have the same people listening to all the same religious programs, and you don't reach out to new people. The ones who are already concerned about God and the country are listening, and the others couldn't care less. They see something's wrong, but they don't want to turn. They just want to play before everything's taken away from them. It's like a last-minute orgy, and they're participating in this orgy before they see the total collapse coming. Well, anyway, one thing that Mr. Rockefeller never mentioned in his quote in the New York Times was that Chairman Mao killed between 64 and 66 million people in order to bring about his wonderful reform in the 20th century. Neither did he even mention that in Russia there was over 30 million butchered who didn't want to be a part of the Soviet socialist system. And right now, the best figures available, there's between 145 and 160 million people since communism started that has been slaughtered. And it's going on. And they systematically destroy whole populations of people, like Lithuania, and over in Vietnam, the Thai people, the hill country people who helped the United States. They're systematically being destroyed. So I think we can see Revelation chapter 6 verse 2 is happening. There was a red horse that came to take peace from the earth, and it's killed 160 million people so far in this century. Well, let's go on just a little bit. There was an article that appeared in the Review of the News magazine. It was September 2nd, 1981. Now this is published in Massachusetts. So anyway, this quote came out. While it is now considered unfashionable by the mass media to group the Red Chinese into the enemies category, that's the enemy of the United States, you see, because Russia's our enemy, so it's now become unfashionable in the mass media. But who controls the mass media? All members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And in our latest June-July magazine that's just off the press, was mailed Thursday afternoon, we will list all the mass media in the United States who are a part of the Council on Foreign Relations or Trilateral Commission, so that when you turn on TV and watch the nightly news, you'll know who is either knowingly or is being used for the other side. Therefore, the news is going to be slanted to program your mind to accepting a one-world government rather than going out and have an all-out nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Now I'll go on with this quote. He says that it's now unfashionable by the mass media to group the Red Chinese into the enemies category with the Russians just because both are communist and sworn to destroy us. Both are communists, both sworn to destroy us, but yet they say, well, let's not knock Red China. Let's just talk about how bad Russia is instead of Red China. Well, he went on to show that the sale of high technology to the communist Chinese is going to help foster their position in the Far East, and therefore they will become the global or the Far Eastern power, because Japan has no military defense to defend itself. They strictly are using their high technology to produce automobiles to help destroy the American economy once again. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So what we're seeing is a barrage of newspaper comments coming out showing the sheer lunacy of our building up the communist regime. And such people as, well, I'm trying to see his name now, John F. McManus. And this is a syndicated columnist. And he wrote back in February 4th, 1982, he was discussing how we're now beginning to sell arms to the Red Chinese. And yet in the Korean War, who was it supplying arms to the Koreans? In Vietnam, who was it supplying to the Vietnamese? Russia and China. And yet here we are, we're preparing the kings of the East. Revelation, once again, chapter 16 and other places in this book of Revelation shows that there's going to be a great and mighty 200 million man army coming from the East. And we're the ones preparing it. How in the world could the greatest free country on earth, who is a Christian nation, do it unless there is a deliberate plot designed from within to destroy us? That's the only way it can be, a deliberate plot. Mr. McManus went on to say, and I quote, "What kind of aircraft does Red China have? If they're supposed to be enemies of Russia, well, look at their aircraft. Then you'll see who is the supplier. They have Soviet MiG-19s and Soviet MiG-21 fighters. Why would the Soviet Union supply them if they're bitter enemies? They're not enemies, not at all." He went on to say, "Isn't it odd that the Soviets would supply tactical fighters to a nation she is supposedly menacing?" No, there's no menacing there. But you see, the Soviet Union are the greatest liars on the face of the earth. They dispense the greatest amount of misinformation so that they can throw you off the track and use us to help them in their world takeover. They went on, there was a Reuters dispatch dated February 7th, 1982. and it showed how the senior U.S. trade official in Washington, D.C., it made one of his comments. It says, he said that this major trade official would consider selling to China sophisticated technology, including military equipment, which is technically more advanced than the weapons that we've ever sold anyone before, and that we even have in our own arsenal. Now that's lunacy. And yet this is happening in the United States because this Bible said that there was going to come someone to take peace from the earth. And this is all a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So we shouldn't feel any anger or anything toward these people because they're only fulfilling Bible prophecy. But yet on the other hand, we can still stand up and preach from the rooftop and call for them to repent and to come out of the system which they're helping to promote all over the world. In the review of the news on November 2nd, 1982, this comment was made. This is disturbing news because Red China is committed to the destruction of the United States and all other free countries. It is also disturbing because the same Lawrence Brady, now this is the Assistant Secretary for Trade in the administration at that particular time. His name is Lawrence Brady. It is also disturbing because the same Lawrence Brady has, on principle, been highly critical of selling sophisticated technology to communist Russia and its satellites. And yet he turned right around and advocated and pushed for the selling to Red China. Well, when you understand that they're together, it's us that's being deceived into supplying and letting our own government use our tax money to supply and build up the Red Arsenal all over the world, then it becomes very disturbing. Well, the Chinese communist leader, Chou En-lai, here's what he said. If anything unusual happens, the Soviet Union and Red China will stand shoulder to shoulder. Now, remember, both are communists. And yet our own government officials, who happen to be members of the Council on Foreign Relations, everyone I've mentioned so far today, they say that there is a rift between Russia, that's what we're shown on the mass media, and China. And that they're not allies, but they're at each other's throat. Could it be that we have been given this information to disorient our thinking so that we would build up the Chinese as well as the Russians? I believe it is. And I believe that we are the one being used to build up the Red Arsenal all over the world. And in the message this afternoon, I believe I can prove from Bible prophecy that there will come a conflict between East and West, a nuclear conflict. And I think we need to know what to do about it just in case. Well, I want to go on now just a little further to show how the Soviets are now beginning to control Europe. In the summer of 1981, President Reagan at that particular time expressed that he wanted to put in new missiles in Europe for the protection of Europe. He also said that he did not want the United States to be a supplier of the 3,600-mile long Yamal pipeline in order to bring natural gas from Siberia into Europe. Well, now let's look at a few quotes that came out later. Now, this was what President Reagan, our present president, stated. On August 3rd, 1981, this is just a little later time, the Department of Commerce, headed by Council on Foreign Relations member Malcolm Baldrige, approved a deal which Caterpillar Tractor Company would sell the super pipe layers to the Soviet Union to help build that. And yet just months before, President Reagan was against such a sale. Caterpillar Company is not only the only United States company that's involved. But listen to this. A UPI dispatch on October 1st, 1981 reported that 3 American companies are part owners of the firm now negotiating to supply all the pipeline or all the equipment to build this pipeline for the Soviet Union. Some of the companies were Exxon, Mobil, Texaco, British Petroleum, Royal Dutch Shell, And when you look at who sits at the top of the chairman of the board and the president of every one of those companies, you see they're all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, there has been a recent effort by some members of Congress who are beginning to understand what all this is about to investigate the Council on Foreign Relations, but it has been totally stopped so far. Phyllis Schlafly writes in a syndicated column, and this is what she wrote on August 12, 1982, talking about the pipeline in Russia that's being built. The key component of the Siberian gas pipeline is a turbine manufactured by General Electric Company. That's here in the United States. And by certain West European firms licensed by that company, by General Electric. Nobody else has a satisfactory substitute. So General Electric either provides the total equipment, nobody else has a substitute. Listen what else she says. The Russian-made turbines are not compatible with the other pipeline equipment and are so inferior that they don't even revolve in the right direction. So you see the type of technology they have? It's just horrible. And yet here we come along and we supply them with all the equipment to build their arsenal. Now, what else are they going to do? Think about this a minute. They are building a pipeline to bring natural gas into Western Europe because Western Europe is running into shortages. Now, if Russia provides this natural pipeline for the natural gas, what happens if Western Europe doesn't go along with all the policies that Russia makes? To me, it just doesn't make sense how anybody in Western Europe would even accept any of the natural gas. Because the minute Western Europe doesn't go along with Russian policy, they're going to cut off the gas. It's that simple. So this is how they're going to now move in the direction of taking Western Europe, that are our allies, into the Soviet communist orbit through energy. But not only that, they're using energy also to bring the United States to its knees. The United States and the Alaskan pipeline, we discovered the greatest oil reserves on the face of the earth. And yet our own government told Arco Corporation, Atlantic Richfield, their top executives, to classify it, to put a cap on it, and never to pump the oil, and not even to make it known that we'd even discovered it. It's Gull Island. This is even richer than, and it's a bigger pool than all of Saudi Arabia, which is the largest known one in the world. And yet the reason they're doing that is to make natural gas and electricity, everything that's energy, used from energy, run from energy, the price to go up and up. So you can either directly tax someone or you can inadvertently tax someone. But you see, if you think, well, the price of gasoline is going up to run our automobiles, well, you don't think about that as a direct income tax. But when you look at the figure, 76% of all tax on gas, or all the price of gasoline is tax. Remember the windfall profits tax? 76% of all your price of gasoline is tax. That's out of our pockets. We pay it, not the gas companies, because they pass on the tax to us, and we, the consumer, pay the tax, and then they pay it to the government. 76% of the price of a gallon of gasoline is tax. Now, this is how they're going to control the American people, through energy. And we're going to have a real dynamite article out in July of 1984 talking about the energy non-crisis and how they're going to manipulate and use energy to take over every facet of our life in the United States. Well, let's go on just a little bit, though. Remember I'd mentioned Senator William Armstrong once before. He stated this: the security of the West is seriously threatened by the completion of the Yamal pipeline. Proceeds from the sale of Siberian gas will earn the Soviets $6 to $8 billion a year in badly needed foreign exchange. You see, their money is practically worthless. I've had money come in here from other Soviet countries to our program, and we can't even get the money exchanged for dollars because it's worthless. And so they need hard currency from Western countries. So they need this hard currency in order to buy war machinery to keep up the building of the missiles, the nuclear submarines that go off our east and west coast right now. And there is one that goes by the west coast and the east coast an average of every 6 hours of every single day. And they carry missiles. Well, he went on to show that they are going to use this pipeline for the very purpose of bringing Western Europe to its knees. And he went on to show that they're using the turmoil in the Mideast to try to destroy supplies of gasoline to the west and crude oil to the west. So that by this pipeline, Western Europe will think they're being saved. And then the Soviet Union will simply turn off the valves whenever they need to in order to bring Western Europe to their knees. But not only that, there's more happening in Western Europe or in the Soviet Union than we think. You see, you and I have never been behind the Iron Curtain. We don't know what real slavery is. If one of us has to miss our chocolate ice cream for dessert sometime, it upsets us because we have so much in this country. But in Russia right now, they have 1,100 slave camps with over 4 million people that are forced to build pipelines, to build cities right now. And they give them nothing but bread and water to live on a daily basis. This is going on right now. And this has been brought up before the World Court, and investigations have been going on, and yet the Soviet Union will not stop their enslavement of people and forcing them in their labor projects. They go into Siberia in the dead of winter, sub-zero weather, 30 below zero, and they have no more on their body than we do right now. This is a fact that has come out, and this Senator Armstrong has been sitting on the review board that has been investigating this. And he says that we don't know what we have in America and that we are taking it for granted, and we're sitting back and watching the Soviets grab and gobble up the rest of the world until it's time when they're going to tell us, look, you're the only one left. Either you come in or we'll blow you off the face of the earth. So we're going to be subjugated to them as total slaves, deprived of everything that we have in this country. And it's going to come. And the people of the United States don't know it because the mass media, who every one of them are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, give a different slant. They state that the Soviet Union and China, this is the greatest experiment on the face of the earth. Now, has anybody seen the documentary on China that's been out lately? How that you can only have one child, and in the factories they have about one person for every 10 or 12, and they rat on them. And if you become pregnant, you'd better get an abortion quick. And how they're killing all the girl babies because in their culture you have the boy is the status symbol for the family. And so they're literally committing genocide as a nation. And yet our own leadership and the mass media is building this up as one of the greatest things of the 20th century. It's a model nation. And they said, if you saw this documentary, they said that this is something that we in the Western world are going to have to consider in the future for ourselves. The killing of anyone but one child. And they gave penalties and so on. If you have more than one child, they penalize you, but if you have one child, they give you additional amounts of dollars for the work that you're doing. Well, this is what we have to look forward to in the future. But I want to show something that is going to happen. In Revelation chapter 9, those who are behind this end-time conspiracy called the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission in the Western world, who are building the communist regime, are going to build it to the point where there is coming a nuclear war, and it's going to destroy a certain portion of the inhabitants of the earth. Down in verse 15. Well, I'll start back in verse 13. And the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming out from the horns of the golden altar which is before the Lord. It said to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill 1/3 of mankind. The nuclear day is coming. And those people in the Western world of the United States and Europe who are a part of the CFR, Trilateral Commission, Combine, are the ones who are building for profit. But of course they think that they're going to gain control of the whole operation, which I believe they will, and I believe they have the economic power to do it. But he said the number of the mounted troops was 200 million. That is a large number. And we're the ones who are building the arsenal for such an army. But that's not all. Let's turn back to Revelation chapter 7. All this end time events are happening. And really, it is kind of scary when you stop to think of all the armaments that's in the world. There's enough nuclear weaponry to blow up 50 worlds or more, just like our own. But in Revelation chapter 7, there is hope. There is hope. Starting in verse 1. After this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or on the sea or on the tree. Now, why would they prevent this? All right, let's go on and see. Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. There is also in the book of Ezekiel a man who goes through the city of Jerusalem. This typifies, as you read the whole book, the house of Israel. The 10 lost tribes that were taken into captivity. They migrated somewhere else in the world, and they are lost to the human view. And yet God knows who they are, and He reveals it in the pages of the Bible. And I want to get into that just a little bit this afternoon. But he goes on and says, having the seal of the living God, he called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea. Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until. Notice now, this massive destruction is going to be held off or staved off until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. In Ezekiel chapter 9, it talks about someone going along with a writer's inkhorn and sealing people. Now, this word seal, look it up in a concordance. It means, according to the Strong's Concordance, it means to preserve someone as in secret. So to me, this says there's going to be someone who is going to receive supernatural divine protection. And it goes on and lists 12,000 from the different tribes, 12 tribes of Israel. But people make a gigantic mistake. And I hear this over and over and over. They say, see, there's going to be 144,000 Jews sealed. It's not what it says at all. It says 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. And when you look at verse 5, it says from the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Judah is where the nickname Jew comes from. So there'll be 12,000 who what we in modern day call Jews sealed. All the rest are from the other tribes of Israel who were taken into national captivity in 721 to 718 BC. They lost the identifying sign of Exodus 31, 13 to 17 of the 7th-day Sabbath. So they don't even know they're Israel today. And yet they are being called as Christians, and they're going to be preserved through this horrifying time as children of God. And then down in verse 9, there's going to be another category of Christians, and these are going to go through the great tribulation. Notice in verse 9, after this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and in the front of the Lamb. They were wearing white robes. And you read and you find in other places that the white symbolized the righteousness of the saints, and were holding palm branches in their hand. Then drop down into verse 13. One of the elders asked me, these in white robes, who are they, and where do they come from? I answered, sir, you know. And he said, these are they who have come out of this is the New International Version, come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So people are going to turn to God during this tribulation period that's coming up. Automatically, right there, these verses say there is not going to be a pre-tribulation rapture. Because Matthew 24, starting in verse 29, it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, then it gives the sign of the coming of the Son of Man. The angels will go out into the four quarters, or the four winds of the earth, and gather the elect. So what I'm saying is that even though these horrifying times are coming, and this end-time beast power is rising, you and I can become so enmeshed with Jesus Christ, and our lives can be so submerged in Him, that we can have protection through this period of time. But on the other hand, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing to be martyred for the name of Jesus Christ? After all, He died for us. Why wouldn't we be willing to reciprocate and be willing to die in belief of Him, if required of us? I think it would be a privilege. I'm not asking for the privilege at this time, but I think it would be an honor to die for Jesus Christ. In Revelation chapter 12, it shows there's just a little more about the protection that is going to be offered in this end time. Let's drop down to start in verse 12. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil is gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. Verse 13. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, this is Satan, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. So this is a church. The Old Testament, Israel, was called the church in the wilderness. And then on the day of Pentecost, we have the New Testament church that was given power. And that power is from the Holy Spirit. The woman was given the two wings of a great eagle. Now you notice in Exodus, the children of Israel came out of the Egyptian bondage, and they came out on the wings of a great eagle, but they walked every step of the way. That was a symbolic language, meaning that there was Jesus Christ in the cloud leading them out, and He protected them, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and a half a times, out of the serpent's reach. So here is a 3.5-year period right at the very end where someone is going to come out of the serpent's reach. He's going to reach out for them. He's going to try to pursue them, but there's going to be a place prepared for them. Where this is, I don't know. Because you see, only Jesus Christ knows. And when it comes time, if you're one of those who have so given your life to God and you're willing to submit to Him all the way, nothing reserved, then you're going to be a part of this. I believe that. Well, you can look at it another way too. If you become so strong in Christ, He may say, hey, these weak ones over here can't be martyred. I'll protect them. Maybe you need to have your neck on the firing line. Well, I don't know. We'll wait and see. But that's just a little thought. But anyway, he went on and says, verse 15, then from his mouth the serpent spewed water. And we see in chapter 17, verse 15, the water is peoples, languages, tongues. So here's going to be armies and so on from this beast system, like a river, to overtake the woman or the church and sweep her away with a torrent. But the earth helped the woman. So there is going to be supernatural protection by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring. So there is going to be a separation. I personally, this is my personal belief, you do not have to believe it, I don't ask you to, but I believe it's going to be those who totally submit their life unreserving. And if they see in this book where it says keep the seventh-day Sabbath, they're going to do it and not let the tradition of men keep them from keeping the seventh-day Sabbath. And if Jesus Christ were to require us to stand on our head twice a day and count to 100, we would do it, no matter how foolish it seemed. If this book says it, we'll do it. Because when you look down in chapter 14, verse 4, it tells who the first fruits are. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, which is false churches, for they kept themselves pure. They follow the Lamb wherever He goes. Total submission, total obedience. And notice what it says. They were purchased now from among men and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. I believe there is going to be a separation, and in Matthew 24 it even says, the very elect. I believe the Christian community is going to have a purifying process to take place. And those who are willing to submit to God first, without having to go through the tribulation, that'll be wonderful. They'll be protected. But I believe the rest, who are going to cling to the traditions of men in spite of what the Bible says, are going to go through this in order to purify them and make them white for when Jesus Christ returns. So what I'm admonishing you today is that let's all be purified ahead of time, and let Jesus Christ, the written Word, and His Holy Spirit lead us into all truth, so that we'll not have to go through the tribulation. But if we do slip, and if we don't become totally pure ahead of time, let's never forget that Jesus Christ will not let us go through more than we can stand. There is a scripture that says it. Nothing will ever be brought upon us that we cannot stand it, and He'll provide a way out. So let's let Christ live in us now.